The rumble of a black pickup truck pierced the weekend stillness of Rosewood Lane. It was a quiet, regulation-strangled neighborhood, the kind where lawns were manicured to within an inch of their lives, and trash bins had a curfew. Curious faces peeked from behind pristine curtains as the unfamiliar vehicle backed into the driveway at 116. A corner lot that had sat empty for months. Out stepped a tall man, broad-shouldered, wearing jeans, a flannel and mirrored sunglasses. That made it impossible to read his eyes. He moved with unhurried precision, scanning the lot like a surveyor. Without a word to anyone, he opened the tailgate and began unloading heavy lumber, metal brackets, and a coil of yellow twine. By noon, he had staked out a full perimeter. By 2 p.m., he was digging post holes with mechanical efficiency. Neighbors watched with growing unease, whispering through group texts and HOA forums. Is that a fence? Did he get approval? Anyone seen the permit? At 3:14 p.m., her door slammed open. Deborah Klein, the self-declared guardian of Rosewood's aesthetic integrity, marched down her porch steps with a clipboard clutched like a weapon. Her lips were already pursed into a preemptive scowl, and her heels clacked like war drums on the sidewalk. She had ruled the HOA for 6 years. Everyone knew the stories. She once fined a veteran for flying his flag a half-inch too high. She'd measured the angle of solar panels. She kept a laminated copy of the bylaws in her purse, like a concealed weapon. If a squirrel sneezed on her, begonias, she'd probably issue a noise complaint. But this was different. This was blatant. "Excuse me," she barked as she approached. You can't just build structures without submitting Form B-17 and waiting for visual review. The man didn't stop hammering. He drove one more nail with a slow, deliberate motion before finally standing and facing her. Up close, he was even more unreadable, his mirrored glasses hiding every flicker of emotion. "I have county approval," he said calmly, "and the HOA packet didn't require fence submission if it's under 6 feet and doesn't alter drainage or property lines." Karen scoffed. "That's not how we interpret the rules." He didn't flinch. Instead, he pulled a folded paper from his back pocket and handed it to her. She didn't look at it. She simply took a photo of it with her phone, then one of his face, and said, "You'll be hearing from us." He gave her the faintest nod and turned back to his work. Deborah spun on her heel and stomped off, her rage bubbling hotter with every step. How dare he defy her? How dare he start building before she gave her say-so? The rest of the neighborhood always bent the knee. Why not this smug mystery man? From behind her front window, she stared at him through binoculars, watching each beam rise into place like an act of personal defiance. But while she studied him, she never once considered the question he was silently asking with every confident strike of his hammer. Did she have any idea who she was messing with? The next morning, Deborah was up at 5:45 a.m., an hour earlier than usual. She didn't need coffee. Rage had replaced caffeine. She sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by open binders full of HOA rules, highlighters, and years of neighborhood violation forms. None of it mattered if she couldn't control this new variable. And this man, this smug, hammer-wielding stranger, was a variable. By 6:30, she was outside, measuring the distance between his fence posts and the sidewalk with a laser tool, muttering to herself. At 7 she rang the doorbell. Mark answered, dressed the same as the day before. Jeans, flannel, mirrored sunglasses. It was as if he hadn't slept, or didn't need to. Deborah smiled, a fake porcelain smile so brittle it could cut glass. "I thought I'd save you some time and drop off an HOA violation notice," she chirped. holding out a single sheet of paper already filled out. I've highlighted 3 different rules you violated, technically 4, depending on how we interpret slope elevation. Mark took the paper, glanced at it. There's no HOA header on this, he said flatly. I printed it myself, she said quickly. I chair the Architectural Compliance Subcommittee. There's no such committee listed in the official HOA documents, he replied, still calm. Her smile twitched. Well, that's because I formed it. To keep our neighborhood beautiful. Mark nodded, folding the notice with clinical precision and slipping it into his pocket like a receipt. I'll keep it on file. He closed the door. Deborah stood there blinking for a full 10 seconds. He hadn't argued. He hadn't promised to comply. He hadn't even looked concerned. That to her was the most offensive part. By 9 a.m., she was on the neighborhood app, next corner, posting under the name Deb K for order, urgent, unauthorized construction, underway at 116 Rosewood, fence up without formal review, safety hazard for pets and children. Does anyone know this guy? Has anyone seen official paperwork? Most people read the post, shrugged, and moved on. But Deborah wasn't done. At noon, she walked back across the street with her phone set to record, holding it out like a shield. She didn't bother with pleasantries this time. I'm documenting this now, she declared. This is a clear visual disruption to the neighborhood design template. Mark, who was cementing the final corner post, didn't stop working. Still within regulation, still under 6 feet, still inside my property lines, still not touching utilities, still allowed by county. His voice was calm, flat, unshakable. Deborah zoomed in on his face, her voice rising. I don't care if you cite the Bible. This is not how things are done here. I've been running this HOA for 6 years, and I've been reading its bylaws since I moved in, Mark said, straightening. You don't actually have the authority you think you do. There was something in his tone, something that made her pause. She studied him more closely now. His posture, his confidence, the way his eyes, though hidden behind sunglasses, never looked away. Who was this guy? That night, she printed a letter on HOA letterhead. She even used an old signature from a former board president she still had on file. Then she marched across the street at midnight in a bathrobe and slippers, taped it to his door, and walked home under the cover of darkness. The letter was marked urgent and demanded the immediate removal of the unauthorized structure within 24 hours or face legal escalation. In her mind, it was a checkmate move, but by the time the sun rose, Mark had read it and was already planning his next step. By sunrise, Mark was already outside, boots crunching lightly against dew-covered grass. He held the forged letter in one hand, turning it slowly, like it was some cheap counterfeit art. The language was aggressive, dramatic, immediate compliance required. Legal consequences? Permanent HOA record. A not-so-subtle scare tactic. But Mark wasn't easily rattled. Not anymore. He folded the letter neatly, walked back into his house, and placed it under a magnet on his fridge, right between a grocery list and a photograph of him in uniform, shaking hands with the governor. Then he made coffee, black. No cream, no sugar, like the mood on Rosewood Lane. By 9 a.m., he was setting fence panels into the posts. The sound of his drill echoed down the street, steady, measured, defiant. From her window across the street, Deborah seethed. She refreshed the neighborhood forum again. Her post had only 2 replies. Looks fine to me, Deb. Are we really still on this? She couldn't believe it. Where were the allies? The residents who used to cling to her authority, like life vests? Mark's silence was loud. Yes, But the neighborhood's silence was louder. At 10:32 a.m., Mark's doorbell rang again. He answered it to find a man in a rumpled polo shirt, nervously scratching his head. Ryan Bishop, HOA board treasurer. Someone Mark had seen jogging with a Fitbit. Never a spine. Hey, just wanted to, check in, Ryan said. There's been some concern about the fence. Mark raised an eyebrow. From whom? Well, just general concern. From, a few people. Or from Deborah. Ryan gave an awkward laugh. Look, man, just between us, she's relentless. I mean, she's technically not on the enforcement subcommittee anymore, but she still shows up to meetings and, well, talks a lot. Mark tilted his head. She forged a violation notice. That's illegal. Ryan blinked. She what? Mark walked into the house, returned with the notice, and handed it to him. Ryan examined the paper, the logo, the missing board member, signatures. His face flushed. Okay, this never came through the board. At all. I know, Mark said simply. I didn't see this. All right, but maybe come to the next board meeting. Maybe. Ryan left, noticeably, faster than he'd arrived. Mark turned back to the fence. His jaw clenched just slightly. Not from nerves. From calculation. This wasn't just about wood and property lines anymore. Deborah, was testing limits. But he had spent most of his career hunting liars who thought they could fake authority. She didn't scare him. She fascinated him. That night, as he double-checked the line of his fence with a laser level, a soft click caught his attention. He looked up. Deborah standing in her yard. Camera phone aimed directly at him. Documenting, she said coolly. For what? For my records. He gave her a 2-finger salute and returned to work. But later that evening, something changed. At 11:14 p.m., motion lights clicked on in his backyard. Mark peered out the window, expression unreadable. On the ground, just inside his fence line, sat a fresh copy of the same forged HOA letter. Only now, stapled to a wooden stake, driven into the dirt, a message, a dare. He walked out, plucked the letter free, and held it up. Deborah watched from behind her curtains. Her silhouette outlined by bedroom light. He didn't wave. He didn't yell. He simply stared. Long, hard, quiet. And for the first time, Deborah's fingers twitched nervously around her curtain. Because suddenly, this didn't feel like a battle over fences anymore. The next day dawned with a sky heavy, like a warning. Thunderheads lingered far off the horizon, casting long shadows over Rosewood Lane. But it wasn't the weather that had neighbors talking. It was the confrontation everyone felt was coming. Deborah hadn't slept. She paced her home in silk slippers, chewing the inside of her cheek raw. That man, that fence, that stare. Something about him was wrong. Too calm, too precise. No one builds with that kind of discipline unless they've had training. And then it hit her. Military police. Or worse, someone with authority. Her stomach soured. She stormed to her office and opened her laptop. There had to be something. A record, a citation. Anything she could use. She searched the property records. Just a name, Mark Haywood. That meant nothing. She searched the HOA roster. Blank. He hadn't submitted his welcome form yet. Infuriated, she returned to her window and watched him finish the last fence panel, locking it in with a smooth clack. The enclosure was perfect. Flush lines, no warping, professionally leveled. She hated it. At 11:30 a.m., she snapped. She stormed across the street, phone in hand, camera already recording. You've officially exceeded the time limit for non-permitted. Construction, she declared, standing just outside the fence line. Mark turned, set down his drill, and leaned on the gate. According to whom? The HOA. The bylaws say. I read them, carefully. And this doesn't violate anything. Deborah's face flushed. You're harassing me. You've intimidated me. Your fence is aggressive in design and tone. I don't feel safe with you next door. Then stay on your side of the street, she gasped. That's it. I'm calling the police. Mark's expression didn't change. No need, he said, pulling a badge wallet from his back pocket and flipping it open. Her jaw dropped. Sheriff. County. Fully certified. The emblem gleamed in the sunlight. I am the police, he said calmly. And you've now falsified a notice under a legal organization's name. That's document fraud. Misdemeanor. Possibly a felony if proven malicious. Deborah took a full step back, phone lowering involuntarily. You can't be moved in last week, he said, still calm. Transferred to oversee rural enforcement districts. This neighborhood falls in my jurisdiction. I didn't know. But you assumed you had power, you didn't. You issued fake violations, tampered with property lines, trespassed. That stake in my yard was over the line, literally. Her hands were trembling now, but she tried to recover. I didn't mean, I was just trying to maintain order. You didn't respect protocol. Mark stepped forward, not threatening, just firm, like a judge delivering sentence. You're not protocol. You're not the law. You're a neighbor. A very nosy neighbor. I was protecting the community. No, you were protecting control. And with that, he walked away. She stood there frozen. The badge image still burned into her brain. For a brief moment, she felt like the neighborhood itself had turned on her. The rules she'd weaponized had finally found a wielder who didn't flinch. That evening, she called the HOA president, the real one. I think we have a problem, she said quietly. But what she didn't know was that Mark had already emailed the entire board and attached a copy of the forged notice she'd left, time-stamped from his security cameras. By the following morning, the entire HOA board had received the sheriff's email. It wasn't just the forged letter that caught their attention, it was the video. Crisp, wide-angle footage of Deborah sneaking across the lawn at midnight, claddy, in a pink robe and slippers, jamming a wooden stake into Mark's property like she was planting a flag on the moon. The clip hit the group chat like wildfire. Wait, is that Deb? That can't be real. She forged a letter. I think we're legally screwed if we don't act. Mark didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. The facts were lined up, documented, and framed with precision. Deborah's paper empire was collapsing, one rule at a time. Across the street, she sat rigid in her dining room, staring at her inbox, an icy silence hanging over her like a guillotine. No replies from the board. No support. Not even Ryan, the spineless treasurer, had returned her texts. She tried the next corner. App. She posted a warning. Please be aware. A new resident has installed a fence without our approval. Disturbing that county enforcement is above HOA process. Do we no longer value community? The post backfired. Replies poured in. Fence looks great. Dude's a sheriff? Why didn't you start with that? Kinda wild you faked a letter. Though, Deb, let it go, let it go. The phrase echoed in her skull like a taunt. She couldn't let it go. If she did, everything she'd built, every whispered complaint she'd acted on, every parking violation she'd photographed at 2 a.m., it would all unravel. She'd go back to being just Deborah. Not Deborah. HOA force majeure. At 2:45 p.m., she saw her opportunity. Mark had driven off, probably for work. A black unmarked SUV, rolled down the street, and disappeared. That meant the property was unguarded. 5 minutes later, Deborah was in her gardening gloves and ball cap, striding across the street with a clipboard in one hand and a retractable measuring tape in the other. She wasn't planning to remove anything. Not yet. Just measure. Just gather data. Just reclaim some control. She opened the gate. It creaked slightly. The air smelled faintly of cedar and cut grass. The yard inside was pristine, well-maintained, boring even. The kind of yard that didn't need surveillance. She walked the inside perimeter, noting lengths and angles. Everything was textbook. Perfect even. That only made her angrier. She bent down to check one of the corner posts and froze. A tiny red light blinked from a motion sensor. Then a soft metallic whir came from above. She looked up, slowly. Mounted on the corner of the roof was a compact, rotating camera. Active, tracking her. Watching, recording. "Oh no," she whispered. And then a speaker crackled overhead. "Trespassing. Please leave the property immediately." Her heart thudded in her chest. She stood, backed away and ran. Full speed across the street, barely glancing back. She slammed her door shut and pulled the blinds. That night, she waited for the knock, waited for the police, waited for Mark. None came. Instead, at 7:13 p.m., her inbox lit up. A message from the HOA board. "Deborah, we need to discuss your recent actions. Emergency board meeting scheduled for tomorrow night. Attendance mandatory." Her hands trembled. As she read the last line, "Note, Mark Hayward has been invited as a special advisor for HOA bylaw compliance and legal review." She read it twice, then 3 times. It was over. Or so she thought. But Mark had one more move to play, and Deborah didn't see it coming. The next evening, Rosewood Lane felt unusually still. Curtains shifted. Neighbors whispered. Lawn chairs were angled discreetly toward Deborah's home, where the once proud gate remained shut, blinds sealed tight like fortress walls. Everyone knew. The video, the post, the board summons. It had all become neighborhood legend overnight. Inside the HOA clubhouse, the board gathered early. Folding chairs lined the room, most filled by curious residents with popcorn-level anticipation. At the center sat Deborah, flanked by her clipboard, her legal pad, and a forced smile that trembled at the edges. She was dressed in her HOA power outfit, grey blazer, stiff white collar. But the effect had dulled. It looked more like armor. Now, desperate armor. Across from her sat Mark Hayward. No uniform, no badge tonight. Just jeans, a collared shirt, and that same steady composure that made people forget to breathe. The president of the HOA, a mild-mannered man named Ted Whitman, cleared his throat. "Let's begin." A hush fell. "Deborah," he continued, "we've reviewed your actions over the past week. We've seen the footage, the fake violation letter, the unauthorized entry onto Mr. Hayward's property. These are serious breaches of conduct." Deborah straightened. "Everything I did was in the interest of preserving neighborhood integrity." Ryan, the treasurer, chimed in. "Forging an official document isn't integrity. It's fraud." "I didn't forge it. I replicated a format for demonstration purposes." Mark raised a brow, the ghost of a smile tugging at one corner of his mouth. Ted continued. "We've also noted your history of unapproved enforcement actions. Ticketing cars, sending letters without board consensus, modifying meeting records." Deborah stiffened. The board was too slow to act. I filled the gap. Mark finally spoke. Calm, measured, like a teacher in a class she never studied for. You didn't fill the gap, Ms. Elridge. You exploited it. You forged authority to control your neighbors. That's not order. It's coercion. Gasps rippled through the room. Deborah turned red, then pale. Let's be clear, Ted said. Mr. Haywood didn't file charges. Yet. But the board agrees. Your behavior has damaged the HOA's trust with residents. Therefore, we're putting it to a vote. Effective tonight, should Deborah Elridge be removed from all remaining committees and banned from independent enforcement communications. Hands went up, one after another, swift, decisive. All except Deborah's. Ted nodded. Motion passed. Silence fell like a curtain. Mark leaned forward slightly, voice even. That's not all. Deborah's eyes snapped to him. Given the pattern of behavior and your history of documenting residents without consent, I'm opening a formal county inquiry into your past enforcement activities under impersonation of official authority. She blinked. You're what? I'm a sheriff, he said. And several residents have already provided me letters, texts, and surveillance showing potential misuse of power. You operated as if you were the law. Now, the actual law will take a look. Ted rubbed his temple. Mark, I didn't realize it had gotten that far. Mark nodded. She didn't just bend the rules. She weaponized them. Deborah stood abruptly. This is a witch hunt. You're all letting him bully me. But no one looked at her. Even her closest allies avoided her gaze. She grabbed her clipboard, clutched it like a lifeline, and stormed out. The door slammed shut, but the air it left behind was lighter. Mark stood slowly. Thank you for your time. He turned, nodded to the room, and left. Outside, neighbors stood silently along the sidewalk. Some smiled. A few clapped. No one said a word. He got into his SUV and drove off as dusk fell over Rosewood Lane. But as his taillights faded into the dark, Deborah watched from her upstairs window, breath shallow, because Mark had just declared the past was being dug up. And she knew there were things in her history she never wanted unearthed. Deborah didn't sleep that night. Not because of the board meeting. Not because of the public humiliation, but because of what Mark said at the end. His exact words echoed in her skull like a drumbeat. Now, the actual law will take a look. She sat by the window, watching the perfectly trimmed hedges of her rose garden, knuckles white around her mug. The roses had always been her sanctuary, meticulously shaped, fertilized, and color-coded like trophies. But now, even they looked exposed, because beneath those roses was a secret she'd buried, figuratively and literally, years ago. Back when her husband was still around. No, not ex-husband. He had never officially divorced her. He had just left. One night, after a violent fight no one heard, he vanished. The police logged it as a voluntary disappearance. And Deborah hadn't asked too many questions. Neither had anyone else. She told them he ran off with a waitress in Phoenix. But there had been whispers. One neighbor saw something strange, a tarp. Another mentioned smelling bleach the next day. But nothing stuck. Deborah knew how to scrub a scene. She'd worked in administrative legal services once. She'd learned things. But if Mark dug deep enough, if the inquiry stretched into her past. She pressed her hand to her temple. It was unraveling. All of it. Suddenly the Ring doorbell buzzed. She jumped. No one ever came this late. She crept to the door, peeked through the curtain. No one. Just a manila envelope on the welcome mat. She opened the door cautiously, picked it up, and slipped. Back inside. The envelope was unmarked, except for one line. You shouldn't have gone into his yard. Her breath caught. Hands shaking, she tore it open. Inside was a photo. Grainy, black and white. clearly printed from a security cam. It showed her digging in the rose garden at night. It wasn't recent. It was from years ago. Attached to it was a single note. "I know what's under the red roses." Deborah dropped the envelope like it was on fire. Someone had been watching. All this time, someone knew. She rushed to her window, scanning the neighborhood. Every shadow looked like a figure. Every car like a threat. Was it Mark? Was it a neighbor? Had someone else suspected her for years and just waited for the right moment? The next morning, she made her move. She walked calmly into the county records office, like she hadn't had a breakdown 12 hours earlier, and requested copies of all building permits and utility work done near her property over the last decade. If someone had set up surveillance, she needed to know when, where, how. The clerk printed out the files. Most were routine: water main work, sidewalk repair, but one entry stood out: 2019. Request for drone surveillance permit. Address match: Rosewood Lane. Applicant: County Sheriff's Office. She stared at it. The file had been closed, redacted. Was Mark watching her even then? No, it couldn't be. He'd just transferred to this district. So who? The panic returned. She left the office and drove straight to the garden center. Bought gloves, shears, a new spade. She'd dig it up tonight. Whatever she'd hidden, whatever remained, it had to be gone. Because if someone exposed it, it wouldn't just be the HOA that came for her. It would be the law, and this time, she knew. She wouldn't survive it. Midnight cloaked Rosewood Lane in thick shadows as Deborah crept into her backyard, gloved hands clutching a shovel. The roses, normally her pride, now looked like sentries guarding a secret, too long buried. Wind whispered through the hedges. Every creak of her steps felt like a shout. She knelt beside the oldest red bush, planted over a decade ago, the very one beneath which she had hidden what should have been forgotten. Each plunge of the shovel sent a jolt up her spine. The soil was dense, damp. It hadn't been disturbed in years. 5 inches down. 10. Then, thunk, her breath hitched. She reached in with gloved fingers and scraped back the dirt. A corner of something plastic peeked out. She tugged. Out came an old sealed contractor's bag. Dirty, crinkled, but intact. She opened it halfway, just enough to peek inside, and froze. It wasn't what she remembered. Inside, stacks of old HOA documents, letters, violation slips, photos, her own reports, ones she had shredded years ago, confiscated license plates, even a copy of her husband's last known credit card statement, torn, coffee-stained. None of this should be here. Someone had replaced what she buried. She dropped the bag and stumbled back, heart hammering. It was a setup. It had to be. But who could have done it? When? And more importantly, what had they done with the original contents? Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Blocked number. She answered, breathless. Hello? A distorted voice, masked with a digital filter. Thought you'd be digging by now. She gripped the phone tighter. Who is this? You lied for years, Deborah. About him. About everyone. Time to make it right. You don't know what you're talking about. You buried a lie. But I unburied the truth. Click. Dead. Air. She stood frozen. Silent. Cold sweat trickled down her spine. Suddenly, headlights swept across her fence. Mark's SUV rolled slowly into view, parking just beyond her gate. She didn't run. She couldn't. He opened the gate with the slow, deliberate calm of a man who never needed to raise his voice. Deborah spoke first. If you're here to arrest me, do it. Mark tilted his head. You think I'd arrest you without a warrant? Without evidence? She didn't reply. He stepped forward, calmly examining the half-dug hole and the contents of the bag. Looks Like you've been hiding things from more than just the HOA, he said. Deborah clenched her fists. Someone planted this. It wasn't here. This isn't what I... She caught herself too late. What, Deborah? She swallowed hard. Mark knelt, lifting the bag gently. See? This is enough for a reopening. Your husband's missing person case was quiet for years. But it's never been closed. And now there's evidence you kept items related to him. That alone is obstruction. Deborah's mask cracked. You don't know what he did to me. Mark met her eyes. Maybe not, but someone does. Someone who's been watching you for longer than I have. He handed her a folded note from his pocket. She opened it. Inside was a photo. It showed her husband. Alive, laughing, holding hands with a woman in Arizona. The timestamp? 2 weeks ago. Her knees buckled. He's alive? Mark nodded slowly. Ran away from you, changed his name, hid. That's why he never came back. But recently, someone tipped us off. He wants to testify. Said he feared for his life. Deborah collapsed to the ground. The roses stood silent. Mark stared down at her, voice low. You tried to control a neighborhood, but the only person who really had control was him. And now that he's back, you'll finally face the truth. As sirens approached in the distance, Deborah looked up through tear-streaked eyes and realized she hadn't buried a secret. She'd buried a lie.